eintlik regtig ja, ons is die mense wat al die jare met meetings doen, wat moet dinge heel, ek meen, ons het iemand kom plak op die grond wat hulle nou bou, ons is die mense wat daar kom plak en daar kom vaststaan, maar nou met dat wat die huise gebou word, nou is daar mense jate wat ons mense wat kwalifiseer met die behuising.
The Kreefgat community of Jamestown, Stellenbosch are in crisis. An established community with deep roots face the threatening calls of imminent eviction.
Ek sal in Kreefgat bly, solank ek hier in 'n huis gaan met die government, maak nie voorsiening vir jou in die een plakkerskap en in 'n ander plakkerskap nie. Almal maak voorsiening vir die slegte omstandighede binne 'n huis.
The community is forced to mobilize among themselves to fight for their very survival against powerful landowners and authorities who exercise unjust means through contract and agreement to deceitfully influence a legal outcome in their own favor, dividing a community through fear, confusion and conflict.
So, julle het vir iemand gevra van resultate, ek gaan sommer eerlik wees met julle, daar gaan definitief gaan 'n bekleierery kom, want ons mense is baie minderheid daarso.
A 2012 community risk assessment by Stellenbosch University concluded by stating that it was obvious there was a breakdown in communication between the municipality, the community and other key stakeholders. This breakdown in communication, lack of decent services and general disdain for the living conditions of this community all culminated in a fire on the 14th of January 2015, destroying over 30 homes, forcing the community, the landowners, namely Blaauwklip and Wine Estate, and the municipality back into communications, but now under a state of emergency. On their Facebook page, Blaauwklippen expressed sympathy for those they called their Kreefgat neighbours, nobly called on the town for donations, and even invoked the spirit of Ubuntu. However, in subsequent relocation agreements after the fire, the spirit was not maintained, and in fact, the first relocation agreement involving the fire victims stripped them of their rights of tenure as well as their dignity by stating, "The validity of this agreement is not dependent upon the validity of the authority granted by the person signing on behalf of some or all of the listed occupiers, and that this agreement will be binding on them, even though these representatives of the listed occupiers may not have signed this agreement, and even though such representatives may not have been duly authorized." This clause could well be considered ultra vires, since this three-way agreement does not require due authorization for the Kreefgat signatories, the community themselves, meaning those who drafted this document, the legal representatives of Blaauwklippen, have acted beyond their legal power or authority. Since they were prevented from rebuilding their homes, the fire victims had no choice but to sign and move to a relocation camp where they could be considered worse off than before. The others, still with homes that didn't sign and resisted this unfair agreement, were left with massive uncertainties.
De mense is bekommerd daaroor, want ek wil nou weer van daar af uit weer na hotel wil gaan bly, want dit was ons die maand, ons wil nie van na hotel gaan.
What is known as Phase 1 of the Jamestown housing development is rumoured to be complete, consisting of 162 semi-detached RDP units with a floor area of 40 square meters. However, only about 25% of the Kreefgat community qualify for these houses, adding more fuel to the uncertainty and confusion.
15 huise is in 'n onder wat reeds op die waglys, wat opgeplak is, wat op die waglys is. So 15 gaan definitief skryf. Maar van die ander wat oorbly, dis wat ons ook, maar ons is verskriklik onseker vir ons weet.
Dinge is nie reg nie. Dinge is nie reg.
The latest agreement to be presented to the court in a case to have the community evicted by the 7th of December, Kluwe Makota, the legal representatives of Blaauwklippen, cite the Prevention of Illegal Eviction and Unlawful Occupation Act, as well as the Extension of Security of Tenure Act, as justification of a lawful eviction. Under the heading Expulsion Order, they begin by stating that it is just and equitable that the community is evicted, and that everyone agrees that the Pai and the Esther Act were followed, and that the community admits that the tenure, to the extent that they have enjoyed it, is now terminated. They then go on to state that the community had been made aware of their rights in terms of the Pai Act, alternatively Esther Act. However, every single community member we spoke to knew nothing of these acts, let alone any details of their contents, even though they were represented for months by advocates, including a mediator. Subsequently then, under the header of waiver of rights, the community is forced to waiver any and all rights that they may have under any applicable law, including the PI Act and the Esther Act, essentially signing away the rights they didn't even know they had. It is clear that before any negotiated terms are even presented, this agreement can be considered once again ultra vires, deeming it quite frankly an unlawful document. The agreement, however, continues by splitting the community into categories. Category A, those that qualify for RDP houses assumed the least affected. Category B, benefiting based on age and the length of time they'd been living in the settlement. Category C, anyone else that does not fit the other categories but still enjoys security of tenure in the community. And Category D, anyone else that happens to be residing in this community but fulfill none of these category requirements. It then goes on to cite monetary benefits for categorized community households, which apparently will be used to secure access to formal housing. This appears to be some sort of bridging finance that looks to be noble on paper, but only until one understands what is required to get access to this finance. Categorized households would first need to qualify based on legislation, and then additionally would have to provide a document of creditworthiness from a financial institution. But this appears unrealistic, as a means test performed by Stellenbosch Transparency on the total household income of the community show 40% earning between 3,500 and 7,000 rand. These households may possibly get letters of creditworthiness, although highly unlikely, and the rest, over 50%, are earning 3,500 rand and less. These households will be unable to qualify for any credit. The community will be forced to vacate the premises by the 7th of December 2016, and it is understood that if they have not vacated, they will be forcibly removed, and this very document will be used as justification for such. After a thorough analysis of this agreement, we conclude that it is not fair nor just, and can be considered legally irrelevant. It raises more questions than it answers, does not clearly state how this community will get access to formal housing, and appears to have a threatening and condescending tone toward the members of this community. Phase 2 of the housing development only begins in 2018 and to be completed at the end of 2021. So even the best case scenario where the households obtain letters of creditworthiness, which is highly unlikely, formal housing would only be a reality in 5 years' time, meaning they would have to move to the relocation camp no matter what, since where would they be resting their heads on the night of the 7th of December when no houses exist? However, through convolution of the facts and indeed reality by those in positions of power, the community members assume they will be receiving houses post their eviction. But after a close study of the agreement, this appears untrue. However, new information has come to light indicating that there is a secret, possibly undocumented agreement between the municipality, Blauklippen, and some of the community that allows for selected households to unduly benefit from the RDP houses. This has caused agitation among other Jamestown residents who have lodged official and quite legitimate complaints involving an illegal break in housing protocol, but have been unjustly dismissed. This in turn has created a climate in which conflict is inevitable. And the notion that a court could approve an eviction with this agreement as its means raises disturbing questions regarding the apathy of the court system towards vulnerable, poor communities, and even deeper questions as to how compromised the legal system in Stellenbosch really is. Final criticism is directed towards all role players in this saga: the municipality, its mayoral committee, and other officials for their complete inability to secure dignified and formal housing for this poor, forgotten community. Blauklippen Wine Estate for its blatant use of obfuscation in almost every form of communication, contract and agreement that they have presented to the community, the media, the courts and the town as a whole, and political activists who, even with the apparent good intentions, are unable to unify, mediate, strategize and ultimately protect those considered their constituency. The community of Kreefgat built a settlement over more than 20 years. They created living spaces and recreation spaces, places for their children, and it needs to be acknowledged the strength and power which they have built up, independent of outside forces. However, the agreement and eviction was made in order of court on the 22nd of September 2016. Their dignity and precious sense of community is now split, rife with suspicions and conflict, destroying their collective sense of strength and unity, plunging their lives into uncertainty and possible future scandal.